our very special speakers, Varsha Ben, Sangeeta Ben, Janvi Ben, Simel Ben, if I may say, Sister Simel, Sister Karen, and Sister Lucy. So we are delighted to have all of you with us. Also, all colleagues and sisters and brothers in the social and solidarity economy movement. Of course, first and foremost, special big thanks to the Global Social Economy Forum for organizing this session and for inviting the International Forum for SSE and inviting us, Seva. As you all know, our theme for today is women and gender equality for social and solidarity economy, especially best practices, challenges, and the way forward in building resilient communities and economies during and after this pandemic. Unfortunately, we're still in the middle of the pandemic. So both during and after, and hopefully for all other crises, human-made or natural, that may befall us, and we hope they don't. I will let our speakers address the issues, but I wanted to just put out some figures from a study that my colleague Saloni and others have done at the Seva Cooperative Federation. And the study has actually shocked us into further action. We have learned that 65% of our sisters in cooperatives have an average of 65% have suffered income loss between April and June 2020. Fortunately, now the economy is slightly picking up, so we may have better figures. 74% of our people coming out from the study have suffered food security issues. And we know from our childcare cooperative that the weight, unfortunately, of our children has declined in the last 6 months. We call it wasting, technically. So we are seeing wasting in our children, which is a matter of great concern because already India has very high levels of malnutrition. On the positive side, 71% of those in the study said that they got employment through their solidarity group, in our case, the cooperative, and that helped them from going under. 80% of them got food grains, rations supplied at low cost and free by the government of India. But only a third of them had bank accounts to access the cash benefit, the cash transfer that the government of India had offered. So you can see the huge challenges. I will not say more because we want to hear voices from the grassroots and policymakers across the world. Just to tell you how we have laid this session out, we have 2 hours and we have 2 expert panels and we have plenty of time for question and answer. I'm happy to share that. The first panel will be with Varsha Ben, Sangeeta Ben, and Janvi Ben. I'll be asking them questions in a minute. And that will be followed by 15 minutes of Q&A, question and answers. So 10 minutes each, please. I'll be a little bit liberal, but not too liberal. And then the second panel, we have Simel and Karen and Lucy. And similarly, I will ask you the questions. I think you have the questions, but I'll ask you the questions and also for the audience. And you will also have 10 minutes each. But again, I'll be liberal with another, well, 1 or 2 or 3 minutes maximum. And then we have 15 minutes of question and answers again from the audience. And we hope for a rich discussion. And we will finish with a few concluding remarks, not too long, by me on the way forward. I would like to also mention that we will be having Gujarati, we'll be having interpretation translation for the Gujarati language, because my Seva sisters will be speaking in their native language. But this will be available in the Japanese channel. And you can see the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. So if you go there and press on the Japanese, you will get the translation for the Gujarati, because I'll be asking them the questions also in Gujarati. And fortunately, Janvi Ben also speaks the same language, so she'll get what I'm talking about. So that's it from me for now. Very much looking forward to all of our discussions and of course, first and foremost, our speakers. So I'm going straight into panel 1, where we have Varsha Ben and we have Sangeeta Ben and Janvi Ben. And સૌ પહેલા હું બધાને નમસ્તે કરતા આપ સૌને કહેવા માંગુ છું કે સૌ પ્રથમ પોતાના બાબત તમે કોણ છો, તમારું નામ, ગામ, કામ અને તમારી મંડળી અથવા તમારા સંઘ હોમનેટ એ બાબત ટૂંકી પરિચય. પછી આ COVID-19 દરમિયાન જે કસોટીઓ, જે તકલીફો, મુશ્કેલીઓ તમે અને તમારા મંડળીને સામનો કરવો પડ્યો એ તમે બોલશો. ત્રીજું, તમારી ભૂમિકા, તમે શું કર્યું અને તમારા જેમ બીજા આગેવાનો શું કર્યું જેથી કરી તમારા મંડળી બધાને ટેકો આપી શક્યા અને બધાની સાથે ઉભા રહી શક્યા આ કોવિડ મહામારી દરમિયાન. ચોથો સવાલ કે ભવિષ્યમાં તમારી મંડળી અથવા તમારા સંઘ હોમનેટને વધારે મજબૂત બનાવવા માટે, મજબૂતીકરણ કરવા માટે શું ટેકાની જરૂર છે, તમને શું સાથ સહકારની જરૂર છે. I'm getting a message that the interpretation is not happening. I'm sorry for that. Maybe we can fix that. But in the meantime, quickly, the questions were, tell us a bit about yourself, your cooperative or your network. In the case of HomeNet South Asia, what were the major challenges you faced? Meaning your cooperative you faced, your cooperative or solidarity group faced. What role did you and other leaders in your organization play in mitigating the adverse effects of the pandemic and meeting the challenge? And what can be done further to support your solidarity group, whether cooperative or network, for the future? All right, we're ready. Varsha Ben,
Yes.
aap chalu karsho. Aapno anubhav.
નમસ્તે, મારું નામ વર્ષાબેન ઠાકોર. હું દસકોઈ તાલુકાના નવાપુરા ગામથી આવું છું. હું 20 વર્ષથી આરોગ્યમાં કામ કરું છું અને એક ખેત મજૂર બેન છું. સેવા સાથે 20 વર્ષથી જોડાયેલી છું. લોક સ્વાસ્થ્ય મંડળીની વાત કરીએ તો અમારી જે લોક સ્વાસ્થ્યના સભાસદો છે, પછી મંડળી દ્વારા કામગીરીની વાત કરું તો મંડળી દ્વારા કામગીરીમાં દર મહિને એક મારી મીટિંગ થાય છે અને એ મીટિંગ દ્વારા જુદા જુદા વિસ્તારના કામનો રિપોર્ટ ના વંચાણ, કામગીરી અને સભ્ય બહેનોના સમયાંતરે વિવિધ પ્રકારની તાલીમ આપવાનું અને બહેનોના સશક્તિકરણ કરવાનું કામ અને જે જમીન સ્તરે બહેનો હોય, સામુદાયિક સભ્યો બહેનો, એમના જાગૃતિના કામો કરીએ છીએ. બહેનોના સ્વાસ્થ્ય માટે તાલીમ આપવાનું કામ કરીએ છીએ, જેમ કે જાતીય પ્રજનન સ્વાસ્થ્ય રોગો, પોષક આહાર, એનેમિયા, પછી બિનચેપી રોગો, ડાયાબિટીસ કે બીપી જેવા રોગો વિશે શિક્ષણનું પણ કામ કરીએ છીએ. સરકારી યોજના સાથે જોડાણ, સરકારી યોજના સાથે જોડાણ એટલે કે જેમ કે વિધવા બેન હોય, નિરાધાર બેન હોય, વૃદ્ધ પેન્શન હોય, પછી એમના આવકના દાખલા, કઈ ઉંમરના દાખલા હોય, કઈ ચિરંજીવી જનની, કસ્તુરબા, કઈ પણ યોજના સાથે જોડાણ કરવાનું હોય તો તે જોડાણનું કામ પણ સેવા દ્વારા અમે કરીએ છીએ. અને જેટલું બને તેટલું સરકારી સંકલનને મજબૂત રાખીએ છીએ, જેમ કે પીએસસી સાથે સંકલન રાખીએ છીએ, ટીડીઓ ડીડીઓ મામલતદાર સાથે સંકલન રાખી અને સરકારી યોજનાઓ લોકો સુધી પહોંચાડવાનું પણ કામ મંડળી દરે ગુણકારી દવાઓ જેમ કે સુધી પહોંચાડીએ છીએ. શહેરમાં સભ્યોને સહેલાઈથી મળી રહે દવાની દુકાનોથી સસ્તા ભાવે દ્વારા આપણે અપાઈએ છીએ. ના સમયે ફોનના ઉપયોગથી ઘેર સુધી તો નથી પહોંચી શકતા આપણે, પણ ફોન દ્વારા એમને આપણે શિક્ષણ આપ્યું છે કોરોના વાયરસ વિશે અને સચોટ માહિતી આપી છે. આપણે સચોટ માહિતી નથી. કોરોના એટલે ડર હતો મગજમાં બધાના કે કોરોના શું હશે, પણ જ્યારે આપણે સચોટ માહિતી આપી ફોન દ્વારા તો એમ કે જે અંદર ડર હતો, ભય હતો, એ લોકોને ઓછો થયો એટલે કોરોના મહામારીમાં પણ આપણે માહિતી આપવાનું સચોટ કામ કરીશું અને અંદાજે 1 લાખ જેટલા લોકો સુધી આપણે સચોટ માહિતી પહોંચાડી છે. જરૂરિયાતવાળા સભ્યોને ઓળખ અને અનાજની કીટ એટલે જે જરૂરિયાતવાળા સભ્યો હતા કંઈક રોજગારી મળે નહીં, કામે ધંધો બંધ થઈ ગયો એટલે એમના પાસે આવક નથી તો આપણે બીપીએલ કાર્ડ દ્વારા અને રેશન કાર્ડ દ્વારા આપણે એમને અનાજનું વિતરણ પણ સમયાંતરે 4 મહિના સુધી તો કરાવી જ તે સાથે રહી. તે પછી જે કીટ આવી હોય કોઈ પણ સંસ્થાએ આપી હોય, આપણને સંસ્થા હોય કે કોઈ પણ હોય, બેંકો દ્વારા આવી હોય કે સંસ્થા દ્વારા, તો કીટ વિતરણ પણ આપણે કરાયું. પછી કિશોરીઓ અને નાની ઉંમરના બહેનો, કિશોરી નાની ઉંમરના જે બહેનો હોય એમને કપેલાનું વિતરણ પણ આપણે કર્યું છે અને સેનેટાઈઝર માસ્કનું પણ વિતરણ કર્યું છે આપણે. સભ્યોની જરૂરિયાત પૂરી પાડવા માટે આપણે ભગીની સંસ્થા અને અન્ય સંસ્થાઓ સાથે સંકલન કર્યું કે જેમ કે પીએચઈ હોય, સીએચઈ હોય, દરેક સાથે સંકલન કરીને આપણે ભગીની સંસ્થાઓ હોય એના દ્વારા સંજીવની ગાડીનો ઉપયોગ કર્યો. પછી કોરોના વખતે સંજીવની ગાડી આવતી હતી ને બીજી ગાડી આવતી હતી, એના સાથે સંકલન કરીને આપણે એમનું કોરોના વિશે માહિતી પૂરી પાડીને કોરોનાની દવાઓ પણ અને માહિતી અપાઈ. આવી કોઈ પણ મહામારી હોય કે કઈ તકલીફ હોય તો એક નાણાકીય સેવાઓ હોવી જોઈએ આપણા જોડે. નાણાકીય સેવાઓ અને બીજું સચોટ માહિતી હોવી જોઈએ આપણા પાસે. સચોટ માહિતી હોય તો જ આપણે કહી શકીશું ને. અને નવી ટેકનોલોજી દ્વારા આપણે આપણું નવી ટેકનોલોજી દ્વારા માર્કેટિંગ લીકેજ કરી શકે એવું જ્ઞાન આપણામાં હોવું જોઈએ. આ બધું આપણામાં હશે તો જ આપણે ભાવિ દિશાના આગળ પહોંચીશું અને એવું એક મંચ હોવું જોઈએ કે અરસપરસ કંઈક શીખીએ અને એના દ્વારા આપણે આગળ જઈએ.
ખૂબ આભાર વર્ષાબેન આપનું. હવે આપણા તાપી જિલ્લાના સંગીતાબેનને હું વિનંતી કરું કે પોતાનો ઉલ્લેખ કરે.
નમસ્તે, મારું નામ સંગીતાબેન વિપિનભાઈ ગામિત છે. હું પોતે એક ખેડૂત છું અને ગુજરાત રાજ્યના તાપી જિલ્લાના વ્યારા તાલુકાના ચીચબડ્ડી ગામમાં રહું છું. હું મેગા મંડળી જે મારા જિલ્લામાં આદિવાસી બહેનોની પહેલી મંડળી છે તેમાં હું કારોબારી સભ્ય છું. મેગા મંડળીની વાત કરું તો તેની શરૂઆત 2013માં સૂચિત મંડળી તરીકે કરવામાં આવી, જેનું 2014માં રજીસ્ટ્રેશન કરવામાં આવ્યું. મેગા મંડળીનો મુખ્ય ધ્યેય એ છે કે ખેતી, ટકાઉ ખેતી અને પદ્ધતિસર ખેતી અંગે જાગૃતિ લાવવું અને તેની સાથે રાહત દરે બિયારણ, ખાતર અને ખેતીના સાધનો સારા અને સસ્તા દરે મળી રહે તે છે. શરૂઆતમાં 500 સભ્યો હતા, પણ આજે 5 તાલુકાના 60 ગામોના થઈને 1001 સભ્યો તેના સભાસદ શેર હોલ્ડર છે. અમે હાલમાં 24 જેટલા ખેડૂત મંડળો બનાવ્યા છે, જેમને ખેતીલક્ષી તાલીમ ઉપરાંત વીમાની તાલીમ, આરોગ્યની તાલીમ, સરકારી યોજનાની માહિતી, જોડાણ તેમજ સંકલનના કામો પણ કરીએ છીએ. આ ઉપરાંત મેગા મંડળી પાસે સરકારનું સર્ટિફાઈડ બિયારણ આપવાનું લાયસન્સ પણ છે. અત્યાર સુધી અમે જાતે ગામોમાં જઈને તાલીમ આપતા હતા, પણ આ કોરોના આવ્યા બાદ ગામોમાં જઈને તાલીમ આપવું અમારા માટે અઘરું બન્યું. પણ કોરોનાથી બચાવ અને જાગૃતિ જાણકારી સભ્ય સુધી પહોંચાડવો એ અમારા માટે જરૂરી હતું. એટલે ટીમે વોટ્સઅપ અને કોન્ફરન્સ કોલથી તાલીમ થઈ શકે તેવા કાર્યક્રમો બનાવ્યા. શરૂઆતમાં મેગા મંડળી મારફતે 20 જેટલા માસ્ટર ટ્રેનરો ઉભા કર્યા, જેમણે બીજા 140 આગેવાનો સભ્યોને તાલીમ આપી અને દરેક આગેવાનોએ બીજા બહેનોને કોન્ફરન્સ થકી જોડી તાલીમ આપી. આમ કરી અમે 36,000 સભ્યોને ડિજિટલ માધ્યમથી કોરોના બચાવ અંગે જાગૃતિ તાલીમ આપી. આ તાલીમથી એક સારી એવી વાત થઈ એ કે ઘણી બહેનો વોટ્સઅપ અને કોન્ફરન્સ કરતા આવડી ગયું. એ અમારા આદિવાસી બહેનો માટે એક ગૌરવની બાબત છે, જે અમે નવું શીખ્યા. આ સિવાય અમારા સભ્યોને 1000 જેટલી રાશન કીટ, 1000 આરોગ્ય કીટ પણ આપવામાં આવી. હું મારી વાત કરું તો મારી આદિવાસી વિસ્તાર એટલે ખેડૂતોની પરિસ્થિતિ બહુ સારી નથી, પણ જ્યારે મને સેવા ફેડરેશન મેગા મંડળીની કામગીરી વિશે ખબર પડી તો મને એવું લાગ્યું કે એક આદિવાસી બહેન તરીકે મારે કંઈક કરવું હશે તો શરૂઆત મારે પોતાના ઘરથી બહાર નીકળી તો જ થશે. અને આજે સેવા ફેડરેશન અને મેગા મંડળીના સહયોગથી જ હું મારો વિકાસ કરી શકી છું. આજે હું મારા પોતાનું કામ જાતે કરું છું, જેમ કે સરકારી ઓફિસોમાં મુલાકાત, સરકારી યોજનાનો લાભ લેવો હોય તો ફોર્મ ક્યાંથી મેળવવું, સભ્યોને તેની સાથે જોડવા વગેરે મેગા મંડળી થકી મારામાં હિંમત આવી અને મારી ઓળખ ઊભી થઈ. આપણને ખબર છે કે હાઇબ્રિડ બિયારણ અને રાસાયણિક ખાતરનો વધુ પડતો ઉપયોગ આપણી જમીન અને પર્યાવરણ દૂષિત થઈ રહ્યા છે. તેના બચાવ માટે સેવા ફેડરેશન અને બધી મંડળીઓએ જાગૃતિ લાવવાનું નક્કી કર્યું અને સભ્યો જૈવિક ખેતી કરતા થયા અને છેલ્લા 4 વર્ષમાં અમે સભ્યોને 87 જેટલી તાલીમો આપી છે. આ ઉપરાંત મેગા મંડળીમાં અમે કેટરિંગનું પણ કામ કરતા હતા, જેનો હવે વધારો થયો છે અને નજીકની ઓફિસોમાં ચા, કોફી, ગરમ નાસ્તા વગેરે આપવાનું ચાલુ કર્યું. તે ઉપરાંત અમને જિલ્લા સેવા સદનમાંથી પણ કોરા નાસ્તાનો ઓર્ડર મળે છે અને આ સિવાય અમે મેગા મંડળીમાં નાની દુકાન પણ ચાલુ કરી છે, જેમાં કોરા નાસ્તા, ખેતીના નાના સાધનો, ખેતીલક્ષી પેદાશો, શાકભાજી, બિયારણ વગેરેનું વેચાણ કરીએ છીએ અને ખાણદાણ પણ બનાવીને વેચીએ છીએ. અમારી મંડળીમાં અમે સેવા ફેડરેશનના સહયોગથી આટલી કામગીરી તો કરી, પણ હવે અમે ઈચ્છીએ છીએ કે અમારી મંડળી પગભર બને, તો તેના માટે સભ્યોને જાગૃતિ બનાવવા અને તેમાંય ખાસ તો જે યુવા પેઢી છે તે જૈવિક ખેતી કરતા થાય તે માટે તેમને પ્રેક્ટિકલી શિક્ષણ અને તાલીમ આપવાની ખાસ જરૂરિયાત છે. બીજું કે અત્યારે અમે નાના પાયે ખરીદ વેચાણ કરીએ છીએ, પણ તે મોટા પાયે કરવું હોય તો અમારી પાસે એવી કોઈ મૂડી નથી. વળી માર્કેટિંગમાં પણ અમારે મદદ લેવી પડે છે. વળી અમારા જેવા બહેનોની મંડળી પગભર થાય તે માટે સરકારે પણ સબસિડી કે ખેતીના સાધનો કરવા કે 0% વ્યાજની લોન વગેરે જેવી યોજનાઓ બનાવી જોઈએ. છેલ્લે ખાસ અમારા જેવા આદિવાસી વિસ્તારમાં કામ કરવા અને મારા જેવા બહેનોનો વિકાસ કરવા માટે હું સેવા ફેડરેશન અને મેગા મંડળીનો ખૂબ જ આભાર માનું છું.
આભાર તમારો. Varsha Ben is a woman farmer from Ahmedabad district, and she's also a board member of her health cooperative, Lok Swasthya. She mentioned several challenges, but one of the predominant challenges she mentioned was fear. People didn't have the information and were afraid. And so that's where they swung into action and provided proper information. Also, she mentioned about kits, relief kits, food and medical kits, and some other action linking people with the government measures, social security and relief measures on the ground. For future, she said that we need solidarity groups, cooperatives like ours need access to financial services, particularly working capital, so we can rebuild again. Because in COVID times, it's been very hard for us. We need ways to have proper information so that people are not afraid and have the right, correct information on health and do's and don'ts. Also support with linkages so that they actually get the government support and measures. And she mentioned marketing, just as Sangeeta did. So those are some of the things that she mentioned. Sangeeta also spoke, but I'm told that you were able to hear because she said, I thought made some really important suggestions. So I hope that was translated. So thank you very much. So I now turn to and she'll say more about that, and she'll be speaking in English. Over to you, Janvi Ben.
Right. Thank you, Mirai Ben. And next time, I promised to get home-based workers from Nepal and Bhutan, and I was thinking it would have been so much a richer discussion between the workers. So next time, I promise that we'll take out more time and get them on board. But today, what I'm going to present is the impact of COVID-19 19 on women home-based workers in South Asia. This will cover some of the points that Mirai Ben, the questions asked by you. But before I start, quickly, a little bit about HomeNet South Asia. We are a network of home-based worker organizations across all South Asian countries. We have 60 affiliates collectively representing 900,000 home-based workers, of which 95% are women. And our affiliates are trade unions, producer companies, cooperatives, and other membership-based organizations of home-based workers. In the month of April, we did manage to have an online meeting with all our members, and one of the key demands they had, one of the key demands they had was if we could do an impact study at a South Asia level, which they could use for advocacy purpose. The first thing we did was we reached out to WeGo because we knew as a sister organization that they were also doing an impact study, a global one. And they were kind enough to share their questionnaire, which we of course added a few questions around care work and domestic violence, and we used that. We did the study in 7 countries in 11 locations, which are Dhaka in Bangladesh, Thimphu in Bhutan, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, and Fulia in India, Male in Maldives, Kathmandu in Nepal, Karachi and Lahore in Pakistan, and Colombo and Kandy in Sri Lanka. We had a total of 394 respondents who were women home-based workers. And the period of the study, we looked at 3 of them: pre-crisis, which was February, lockdown, which was April, May, and post-lockdown, which was July, August. And the data was collected by our members in all these locations. We're still writing the report, but I thought it'd be interesting to see some of the findings. And the first finding, again, is that no surprises here, that during the lockdown, we saw a dip in the income for home-based workers across these locations. Again, we're not saying the data, it's a very small sample size. So, it's not representative of a country or that location also, but just to show that in India, all 3 locations, there was absolutely no income, while in other countries, there was still some amount of income which was there. Also to mention here, Thimphu never really saw a lockdown. So when we were looking at the lockdown period, the income dipped, but that was because, tourism had stopped and there was no market, but not really because of the lockdown. And there was a voluntary lockdown in August, and that's where we saw a dip in the income. We also found that the income difference between the 2 categories of home-based workers, the own account workers who have direct access to raw material and markets, and the piece rate home-based workers who provided work through a series of subcontractors and paid on a piece rate basis. We found that prior to the crisis, the own account home-based workers earned more than the piece rate workers. Now, this is not a surprise for organizations who are already working with home-based workers. But what was surprising was that, when the lockdown was also lifted, the recovery for own account home-based workers is much better than the piece rate workers that we saw. In fact, many piece rate workers are talking about having absolutely no work at the moment in many locations. Then we also compare data between home-based workers who were part of Sabas. Sabas are these producer companies and cooperatives as compared to other home-based workers. We compare the data on home-based workers having absolutely no work, pre-crisis, lockdown, and post-lockdown period. What we found was that during the pre-crisis period, 1% of the other home-based workers had no work. During the lockdown, 76% of the other home-based workers had no work, as compared to 43% of home-based workers who were members of Sabas. And post the lockdown, 45% of other home-based workers had no work as compared to 22% of the Sabha members. I wish I could show some of these supply chains of the Sabas because they're extremely interesting, but due to paucity of time, I may not be able to do it now. But I'd like to explain the key reasons why the Sabas are able to access work is because they're able to redesign their supply chains to make masks, medical coveralls, and also shift the supply chain from garment to the food sector. They've also managed to reskill their members, procure new machines, and they were able to get permits to work even during the lockdown, which was very difficult for the home-based workers. Now, even, if we don't consider the pandemic, most home-based workers would complain about the unfair burden of care work. And what we found was that during the lockdown, when most of the family members were confined to their homes, the care work increased for home-based workers. 65% of the respondents reported increase in cleaning work, while 50% spent more time on childcare. And apart from Bhutan, all countries reported weak and poor outreach of government relief. In fact, 70% reported receiving no cash or food under government relief, and 45% respondents reported that they got food packets from their own or other organizations, especially religious institutions and citizen initiatives. Now, Bhutan was an exception, and I thought it'd be interesting to just talk briefly about it here. Bhutan anyhow has a superior social welfare system that covers housing, education, and health services. Also, the relief work has been wide and targeted as per the need of the people of food, cash, interest payments, subsidies, and protective gear. 40% of the respondents received cash relief, with interest payment being waived off for several months. Also to mention here that the Bhutan government included the producer companies and cooperatives that we have in all the work that they did. Home-based workers in all locations reported of savings being wiped off and borrowing money for consumption. However, in Bhutan, only 4 respondents mentioned resorting to these means. The government also made special efforts to procure masks made by home-based workers, which were included in the relief kits made for elderly for the entire country. So this was a big order. In fact, they found this order to be much larger than what they were used to making. I should also mention here that Maldives also has universal access to health and education, and they also had cash support, which was announced. However, respondents mentioned tedious documentation required to access any of this support. Now, quickly on the recommendations, of course, we're still writing the report and we'll have very detailed recommendations, but I thought of, at least mentioning 3 of them. First is to work towards a well-planned, quick strategy to cover food and other essential needs during crisis without the overwhelming procedures. Food was a big priority for all respondents. Many of them spoke about getting free and accessible food for the next 6 months. The second is to have strong and effective social protection systems that systematically covers home-based workers and reducing the vulnerability and improving resilience to cope with this crisis. And third is to support producer companies and cooperatives. I mean, we've heard about tax exemptions being provided by countries to global, garment brands. Why not for the producer companies? There are some certain things provided to cooperatives, but, we've seen there's little for producer companies. We also saw, one of the recommendations was also to provide special financial support. While we hear of loans floating around, that's not what the producer companies are looking for. And the last is, preferred procurement of the products made by home-based workers. So I'm going to stop here and we'll wait for more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janvi Ben. Any other questions from the audience first? Second question, are the studies from SEWA and HomeNet South Asia available? I think Janvi can answer for herself, but the one of the Cooperative Federation, Simel, we are it's a draft still. It's in the process of being finalized, perhaps by the end of the month, and then we'd love to share widely with all of you. Janvi Ben, would you like to speak about HomeNet South Asia?
Yeah, Simel, I can share this presentation with you, but our timeline is also fairly similar. First week of November is when we launch that study. So we can share it then, but I can share the presentation if you want.
Yeah. So, and we're happy to share our draft with you too, Simel. I think I'll go back to the earlier question, which is, how do we build a different world, a world that works for all? That's what I understood from the question. And world that depends on, going back to the question, on solidarity, social and solidarity economy. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it doesn't have to be just Varsha Ben, Sangeeta Ben, and Janvi Ben. Janvi Ben, of course, you're welcome. It can be anyone, and even our future panelists, the next panelists can also jump in. And then we have a question from Karen. Anyone?
I could
Yes,
start.
please. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, what we hear from all our members, it's not just the respondents, but other members also of HomeNet South Asia, is we really have to work towards reducing vulnerability at the moment. The issues that are coming up are not really new issues. These are the old issues which have been amplified a lot more. So, we also have been talking about universalization of social protection, but we saw in Maldives, it doesn't stop just there. How do you make it accessible? In other countries, we saw wherever any government programs were accessible were only because there were organized groups. There were organizations of home-based workers, which could be cooperatives, producer companies, trade unions, who managed to create this access for home-based workers. So I think first is to reduce vulnerability. And the second thing, which we feel, and what we're seeing is this piece rate workers were part of these global supply chains. In fact, they were the worst affected. From January, their work started reducing, and from March, they've had no work. They haven't been paid from January onwards. And what we see is now when they're building ground up, they're redesigning supply chains, of garments, of food. And this seems to be working a lot better. So can we rethink about it? In Bangladesh, what we've heard is the government has these tax exemptions for the garment sector altogether, right? So they have exemptions for the first 3 years, first 5 years. What are they really doing to build ground up of these organizations? They're excellent cases, they're small. SEWA has had excellent models of federating cooperatives. Can we think about doing something of that sort? So I'm just going to stop there, and maybe Sangeeta Ben and Varsha Ben could speak more.
Thank you. Sangeeta Ben, Varsha Ben, તમારા ભાવિ દિશા અને ભાવિ દુનિયા રચવામાં કઈ કહેવું હોય તો?
હવે અમારે મંડળીને પગભર કરવું છે એટલે અમને એક તો સલાહ સૂચન, માર્કેટિંગ અને મૂડીની ખાસ જરૂર છે.
બરાબર. I hope that was translated. She's speaking more of her decentralized cooperative world. Good. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll move to the next question, which is actually by Karen and also directed at Janvi. Janvi, did you see the question or do I need to read it out?
Yeah,
I'm curious with the experience from Bhutan and the large order for masks. We tried to do something similar in South Africa, but the cooperatives were overwhelmed. Would appreciate feedback on how this order was placed and managed and how organizations were supported.
Right. I mean, I would also like to say I absolutely love the solidarity that organizations in Bhutan have. So while our own producer company, who's a member, got this order from the government, they did realize it was much larger than what they could do. And they involved not just one or two, but they had 11 organizations who they involved in the country to make masks. What they did was, because they're experts at it, they did a lot of training on cutting, stitching, finishing, and all of that. And they placed their leaders and they decentralized the production as much as possible. They also had these work centers at district levels, and they opened them up for other people to come and work there. So they built this solidarity. So it was not just their own producer company who did it. They also had small cooperatives. They were involved, but also 11 other organizations were involved in the process. So it was a big solidarity effort between those organizations also.
Thank you, Janvi Ben. And I think that also points to the question on future solidarity efforts. Any more questions at this stage? Okay, I don't see any more. Oh, there is maybe one more. No, not right now. So we can, I think, go straight into the other panel, next panel, and I'm sure there'll be more questions. So my dear sisters, in the next panel, moving right along, I'm just opening out the questions so that I don't miss anything. So we will start with Simel and then Karen and Lucy. And this is a widening of the discussion and developing of methodologies, and also perhaps referring to some of what you've heard, if you like. But the questions we have for you are: what concrete actions and asks can we present to policy makers to support women's SSEs? Second question: how can we build platforms to engage and learn from each other's experiences? This is actually one of the things Varshaben asked for. How can we build platforms to engage and learn from each other's experiences? What works and what doesn't work? And third, how can we encourage governments, local, state, and national, and the private sector to support women's social and solidarity economy organizations and consolidate the gains they've made through the pandemic? You just heard that, at least in South Asia, most governments did not perform well on this. So we look forward to hearing from you. So I will now turn and give the floor to Simel, who's our long-term colleague and sister from the ILO, and we're delighted to have you with us here today. Thank you, Simel. All yours for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mirai-Ben. The initiatives that we heard, the Women's Co-op Collective and other social solidarity economy initiatives we heard from in the first round from Janhavi-Ben, Sangeeta-Ben, are real social, I think, innovations. And that means they are collective processes of learning involving distinctive participation of social actors, aim to solve a social need through social practices, relation systems, and creating real change. So as such, I think we really need to emphasize the need for them to be recognized as social innovators by local and national policy makers, as partners in delivering on both social, economic, and also, oftentimes environmental goals. I think while the role of local government in supporting these institutions is essential, this should not be in the form of these one-time gestures, providing an assistance here, a market stall there, some equipment here, but sustain in the long haul with real allocations of budget and financing. And as Janhavi said in response to Yun's question, the goal is to reduce vulnerability and to increase resilience for informal economy workers and their organizations in the long haul, and not just in times of acute crises. Because oftentimes what we see is governments and everybody, public opinion recognizes how important these institutions of poor people and workers are in times of crisis. So they're seen as part of immediate rescue, but then they are forgotten. So very important that they're not in just these committees in the emergency phase, but they are then there for the resilience building in the long term. For instance, in Latin America, the way waste pickers and their co-ops and associations got recognition is through agreements, signed agreements with local government to integrate them as recycling workers and as sorting facility managers in waste management chains. They were recognized even in the constitution in Colombia as recycling workers. So getting them into real long haul agreements and regulation having an inclusive framework, policy framework that's conducive to establishing new SSE institutions and women SSE institutions is key, especially in non-traditional sectors. And Mirai Ben and Sonia Ben, you know that in the study that we did together, it showed that the officials responsible for registering these co-ops and collectives were unfamiliar and resistant often to setting up these institutions, and they didn't fit their notions of what a cooperative action is, like agriculture or finance. So while working on inclusive regulation, it's also important to get these government officials oriented and get their mindsets that, you know, women, rural, informal women who may not be literate can and do form these organizations and support their members in organic or in care or in health and type of activities. And I think another important issue in South Asia, we see this also, a conducive policy should not mean having government interfere with the governance of these institutions, women's co-ops and other solidarity organizations like rotating saving groups, especially with regard to their governance, their member management, democratic membership, and that the policy environment supports their growth through the financing and training, but they do respect their autonomy and their important decision making. John Harvey mentioned, and your second question is around platforms. So I think there is the vertical institution building and horizontal alliance building. The vertical institution building are like the Seva Co-op Federation, the unions, federations, where the co-ops and other solidarity organizations can have a platform of thousands and 10,000s and hundreds of thousands in the case of India, so they can have this numbers to be able to influence, create visibility through for their voices. And I think, Mirai Ben, you're on the board of WeGo, Women in Informal Economy Globalizing Organizing Network. This is a nice form of vertical integration, example of vertical integration across sectors, domestic, home-based, the waste picker, street vendor, to their associations at the national, regional levels, and then the international advocacy and research and support. And this, what is the effectiveness of this? I think one concrete example is how they've advocated for international standards, sitting at the international labor conferences and pushing for Convention 177 on homework, 189 on domestic workers, Recommendation 204 on transition from informal to formal economy. This is grassroots women's voices and concerns being heard, and through their organizations at the international level. I think with respect to the alliance building, the horizontal one, we really need to activate these existing cooperative institution and SSE institution infrastructure, credit unions, mutual associations. We really need to press with them that they have to ally with their financing schemes for the development, expansion, and replication of women's SSEs. I know in Canada, Japan, Italy have some, even Kenya has some good examples of this, and we need to really learn from how to do that. Of course, the Seva Bank was the first institution of Seva, but we need more of these co-op financing and social financing streams to be connected to these initiatives. Similarly, the vocational and technical education, entrepreneurial education institutions, how do we, of co-op movement, of government and women's organizations, how do we get them to be partners in incubating, coaching, accompanying, mentoring services, because what we see often is that when with vulnerable groups, you need a longer term of incubation and support. And again, the SEWA study showed that. And I think when things don't work, we need to be also honest about it. And what didn't work, we need to really reflect on that. With researchers, research institutions, we need the alliance of those two to help build monitoring systems, track effectiveness of women SSEs from universities. They can help document, but I think one important thing is to move beyond these fragmented individual case studies, but look at the ways that systems are built or can be built toward movements. So there's a lot of these individual ones, but we need, and also the statistics, of course, is important. There are many initiatives to address data issues, but being like the study you mentioned from SEWA, HomeNet, these are important evidence to be able to influence the policymakers. We have now guidelines on statistics of cooperatives from the International Labor Conference of International Labor Statisticians, and we really need to operationalize them for harmonized, comparable data. And finally, yes, from this period, the co-op and solidarity institutions are being integrated or recognized in emergency response, great, but it isn't always the case in crisis time. So what matters is that they are recognized as community actors in building long-term resilience and for their members and wider communities. And they need to be in these task forces. I will give just 2-3 examples of how it is important, for instance, to not just have them as part of enterprise or civil society packages, but establish, standalone SSE funds. And you have some of these examples like from Korea, but establish specific SSE funds. And then for public procurement of goods and services, put in quotas and give priority to SSE institutions, co-ops, and women's, especially, collectives in particular. And budgeting, we've talked about people's budgets, gender budgeting, inclusive budgeting practices, but we should also ask for crisis management budgets to be gender responsive and responsive to the social and solidarity economy institutions. And I will stop here.
Thanks, and we'll look forward to more comments and suggestions in the discussion session. Thank you very much, Simel. And now I'm happy to turn to Karen, who I'm seeing and meeting for the first time, but very pleased to meet you, Karen. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you. And it's really lovely to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I still find it extraordinary that we can connect so globally in such a seamless and easy way through Zoom. So there are positives to COVID, and it's a real privilege to be part of such a global discussion. So I'm coming to you from Johannesburg in South Africa. And my perspective is I am with the International Labour Organization, and I am advising the South African government as it develops a policy for the social economy. So the process in developing this policy has really flagged some of the issues that are working really well, but also some of the things that I believe need further attention. And I'd like to touch on some of those negatives, because I always think Simel made this point well, that we need to focus a bit more on the things that don't work if we really want to be able to figure out what is and can work. The first point I'd like to make is just the extraordinary parallels between our experience for our social and solidarity organizations here in South Africa during lockdown, that the comparisons to the experiences of what's happened that we've heard at the beginning of this call are 100%. This struggle that community-based organizations in particular have in accessing information in being networked amongst themselves, but not networked to the broader institutional environment, so they remain excluded. The difficulties in balancing childcare and being the breadwinner or the person who sustains the livelihood of the life of the household. And it was really lovely to hear those experiences from Bhutan, because we tried to integrate the SAC into our emergency responses, but we definitely didn't do it as well as the experiences that we heard there. So I would like to share with you, I've got the 3 questions laid out, and I've got a few things that I'd like to say just to flag around gender equality in the social economy. And the first is that in our research that we found in developing the policy in South Africa is that the social economy does great things. And the principles of solidarity are incredibly important, particularly in distrustful environments like we see in South Africa, where there is this growing gap between how citizens experience their government and how government interacts with its citizens. And so the first dilemma that exists for policymakers is that our role is not to regulate the social economy, which is a typical policy response. Like, oh, we want to enable this ecosystem, let's impose regulation. And what we're seeing is that added bureaucracy, that focus on the organizational structure, stifles the growth of the social economy rather than enables it. And what we discovered in our national consultation, and I must make this point as well, is that our knowledge of the social economy, certainly in a South African perspective, and I think you can probably apply our findings to maybe the English-speaking countries across the continent. I think that's what I'm saying, that experience, confirming the East Asian experience to the South African experience, is showing that there are these common gaps. But is that our inequality must be taken into consideration when we try to understand what our social economy looks like. Because often we understand our social economy from an urban perspective, but really don't understand the real community rootedness and anchoredness that these organizations have. So understanding, I've interrupted myself, so I can feel that I've already lost my first point, but understanding our social economy in its diversity is critical, so that the one-size-fits-all approach, we need to recognize as policymakers that can't and shouldn't apply. And that talks to my second point, which is that these are organizations that operate hugely on trust networks. They don't operate because they are registered or because they signed a contract with someone and therefore that's how those relationships are negotiated. They operate on trust. And in low trust environments like ours, that trust is critical. But it poses a very difficult question for policymakers, which is, how do you enable trust networks without stifling trust networks through excessive regulation? And so for policymakers, sorry, the dog is barking. For policymakers, there's a very interesting dilemma that I think we need to start working on to resolve. And the third point that I'd like to say is that we need to recognize that the social and solidarity economy, certainly in my context, operates along very traditional gender lines. Women are still responsible for care work, and the entrepreneurial activities that they undertake are closely related to what they know, which is care work. So we see we see women operating, they're running creches, they're involved in home-based care, they're looking after elderly people. And I will be quick because I know the dog is going to bark a lot. Just give me 2 seconds. Sorry. Sorry. If we really want to champion gender equality in the social and solidarity economy, we really need to work amongst ourselves to profile women who are doing non-traditional work in construction or in STEM. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can do, is to really start championing and extending the networks and profiling the role and scope of what women do in their community, so that we ourselves can work outside of these gender biases. So I will leave it there. Apologies for the interruptions, but hopefully that's thrown out some points as to where I think the social economy is doing well, difficulties for policymakers, but also what we need to do amongst ourselves to continuously promote our concept of the work that women do. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the reality check of the barking dog at your home. So that's what all of us, and I think across the globe, and women in particular, have to deal with, as you have reminded us. So thank you again, and may I now turn to Lucy, Sister Lucy.
Hi.
Meeting you also for the first time, and a great pleasure. So the floor is all yours, Sister Lucy. I hope
Thank
I'm
you.
pronouncing your name right.
It's okay. Lucy's fine. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my presentation with you in a few seconds. Quebec, and I'm gonna talk about my organization and also a special project we had with women entrepreneurs for almost 14 years. So the name of my organization is Philaction. We are a development fund that support Quebec SMEs, particularly from diversity, social economy, culture, and tourism. We were created by a union fund named Fondation in 2001. We do finance SMEs, social economy, cultural, as I said, and businesses, especially businesses in rural and semi-urban area, because there is a lot of investment fund in the more urban area. That's why we focus in the rural and the semi-urban area. We are interested also in the inclusive finance and capitalization and management of investment funds for unserved or underserved population sectors such as women entrepreneurs. So basically what we are doing every day is to loan money from $50,000 to $500,000 Canadian dollars. So you have to do the multiplication. We do short and long-term loans with or without guarantees, depends on the project. And revolving credit, purchase of shares, we do a lot of things. And the loan can do up to 7 years. The special project that I wanted to talk to you about began in 2002. We implemented in all Quebec areas, which is 17 little regions within the whole region of Quebec. We implemented a small fund for women entrepreneurs because at that time women needed to have access to finance to finance their own project, especially in the more remote regions. Most women entrepreneurs have no credit or little credit history, and they were more difficult finance project to build in. I mean, personal services, retail commerce, small manufacturing. These are projects that are difficult to get finance in a bank, for example. They had no or little business network, so they were all not put into a network of any sorts. And historically, financial institutions had always a very masculine way of operating. So sometimes a woman go to the bank and the husband has to sign or to guarantee the loan, and it was difficult for them to get their money. So the slogan of these funds were by women, for women, by women. So it was a modest capitalization of investment funds. So it was $600,000 for each region, and there were also very small loans, so from $5,000 to $25,000. And the decision making was collective. The investment committee was made of a majority of women entrepreneurs, and the investment policy also was specific to the need of women. So the impact that has that those funds had on between those years, we did 743 loan, and it was for a total investment of $13 million. And the average loan was $17,000 invested per project. So you can see it was not a very big project. The leverage of each dollar was from 1 to 6. So from every dollar we invested, $6 came from the outside, from another institution, a finance institution, or a bank, or another investment fund. So on the total borrowed capital, 28% remain outstanding and active. So there is some money out there, still money out there. And 60% has been repaired, and 16% has been written off. So it's the losses are not very big. As far as the as far as to attend gender equality in my country, as far as women entrepreneurship goes, we have a lot there's a lot to be done still. Only 16% of women are business owners in Canada, so it's not that much. There's a lot of credit program subsidies available, but the difficulties are still big, still grand, because everybody wants to finance the same type of project all the time. They want to finance technology, manufacturing, but not project that women are in. So which is personal care, health, retail. So these are still type of businesses that are difficult to get to access to finance and money. So, and there's no specific program for business startups. So they want the government we have says it's a feminist government, but we don't have any specific program or money for business startups. So if you want more women in business, you have to give them access to business startup money, which is not the case right now. And also there's a lot of willingness, and there's a lot of good desires to have more women in business, but there's no specific objective and no monitoring of the results. So they put programs and money out there, but at the end they don't monitor their results. So we don't know how it went. We don't know if it's working well or not. So it might be a good thing. And also there was a very big study that was made last year, and that showed that on the long run, the business owned by women tend to be smaller on the long term, because the fear of credit and also the lack of the knowledge of the bigger financing system. There's a lack of knowledge in that, so there is things to work on. And also a few things that the pandemic showed us. Our health and social system needs to be completely reviewed. It was really badly put to the front, and I think there might be some opportunities for for women in Canada to have better business project in those two areas. The future will tell us how it goes. Also, there is also business women who did very well during the pandemic. Catering services, cleaning services, technology, agro-food, and especially organic. And when I say they did very well, they probably doubled and tripled their revenue during that time. So there was also some opportunities there. So that is all for me for right now, and I'm quite available to answer your question if you have some for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and for you and other friends from Quebec and the rest of Canada joining us at the wee hours of the morning. We truly appreciate. We now have another 15-minute slot for question and answers. So I turn to the audience, and I also turn to any of the participants who would like to ask questions, make observations. Now is the time. So I see some questions coming up on the chat. Yes, Madame Fatou. Women are very present in the SSE, but the governance bodies are still majorly led by men. How do we work on closing that particular gap? So we'll take that question first. And then there's a specific question for Lucy from Karen, whether you can give some more information on the guarantees asked for. When were they asked for? So
well, I can begin with this one because
okay.
It's more technical. Well,
sure.
When we have SSE's project as cooperative or non-profit organization, we don't ask for guarantees because the guarantees are more collective. We ask guarantees when it's more a private business ownership and they have assets so that we can link on. But it's really it's a risk evaluation that we do every time, and it depends on each project is different. So we sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. It really depends on what kind of project we have. If it's considered really high risk, like I would say retail, or I don't know, something, a real startup, when we don't have a close look on the market, we could ask for guarantees, but mainly it depends on each project.
Thank you very much. And Fatou's question, women are very present in the SSE, but governance bodies are still majorly led by men. How do we work on closing that particular gap? Anyone would like to jump in here? Anyone?
Sure. I think some hi, this is Simel. Thank you, Miraiban.
Sure.
Some sectors are worse than or need more improvement than others, especially, for instance, agriculture and finance. Gender action plans are important in this regard, and putting, like any organization, putting quotas, doing fast tracks within the institution, hiring, it's not just also, I think, women's participation, but bringing younger generation. One of the issues for, especially, for instance, in some of the co-op institutions is how do you get the younger generation also on board? So bringing younger women on board and preparing them for this the management track, or for encouraging them to take on more leadership positions is a good idea. And then there's the other side, flip side of the coin, where you have the occupational segregation that exists in the world of work, is also very much demonstrated in these institutions, as this institution. So in care and in more the craft social sectors, you will have in many cases women-only initiatives, and they often stay much smaller. So the issue there is, of course, for more recognition and support for these institutions, so they can have the opportunity to grow and scale up.
Thank you very much. Anyone else on this? So maybe Saloni? Yeah, please. Yeah, and introduce yourself also, Saloni, please. Can't hear you, Saloni. Nope. Sorry.
Hello.
Yes. There
Sorry.
you go.
My name is Saloni. I've been working with Seva Cooperative Federation for a year and a half as a senior coordinator. Thank you so much, Miraiban. I want to jump in on Madam Fatu's question on women in SSEs and how about the lack of their presence in governance. I think two things are important. One, which Seva Federation is doing, is building the capacity of women leaders. And not just skill-based training, but also soft skills, building their capacity as to kind of mobilize other women in the area, to kind of gain information on local governance, to kind of link them to a larger network. So that sort of capacity building is one thing. The other is the need of an enabling environment, a larger federation, which connects them later on to these governance structures, because women are unable to do this in isolation. They need a support system which helps them do this. So that kind of dual approach, I believe, I mean, the closing the gap is a process, but it can lead us towards closing the gap.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Janvi Ben, would you like to say something from the South Asia perspective? Okay, I don't think Janvi. Anyone else? There's some observations and there's a question. Yeah, please, Karen, please
I can
go
jump
ahead.
in. Sorry, I started to
Sure.
type and then I realized I can actually speak as well. So,
Please. Correct.
I really find that the information that's coming through, and you consider how far apart we all are geographically, but how common the issues are, is that these are often invisible power issues. So exactly what Saloni has just described is this inability by women to really see the power that they have, because culturally or normatively, there are these imposed barriers. So what we see in South Africa is that the governance structures tend to be very weak, because there's a lack of information and there's a lack of shared information. So people can be quite closed in their community, but are unable to share outside of their community what their experiences are. So this opportunity to really network people in terms of their day-to-day experiences, I just don't think we can do enough of it. It's so critically important to be able to be exposed, just like what we're doing here. Like, I'm learning about what's working in Bhutan, and I can relate that back to my experience here in South Africa. That has a very empowering effect for me as a woman, to be able to validate my own experience and to be able to make sense of it. So this opportunity to be able to network, and then to recognize that the society around us, this point was made very nicely by Lucy, is quite masculine, and that our normal, really, there's part of our normal that we probably shouldn't really be accepting, and we need to acknowledge that to be able to know how to change it. So in our research, just to close, what we found was that the barriers that women felt were exactly what Saloni has just said: a lack of access to skills, not in skills in terms of how do I look after children in the creche, but those business skills. How do I access capital? How do I walk into the bank and ask for funding and financing? The government seems quite far and remote to me, and it's scary. And so there's a lot of these power dynamics that are informal power dynamics that I think we need to informally look at how we address. Training is a great opportunity. Networking, obviously, I think is really important, and normalizing being able to ask questions and knowing what to do with the response, so that I have a response to those questions that I've asked. Thank you.
Thank you.
Miraiban, I can come in. Sorry, I have internet connectivity issues.
Please do.
So in South Asia, just to say that I used to work with Seva for a very long time, then moved to HomeNet South Asia. and we're surrounded by women. All our organizations are full of women. And, you know, so for us, in fact, I forget to sometimes mention the gender perspective because, you know, we take it for granted. Having said that, a lot of these organizations that we have, we've not faced this issue that the governance doesn't have women on board. The issue that we have is operational teams that we have and the technical staff that we have is full of men. And how do we balance that? So there is a lot of capacity building happens for home-based workers, and we're trying to say, you know, even though I don't think it's really an upward mobility, but a lot of them call it upward mobility, where they, you know, home-based workers shift and become technical staff members and CEOs of companies and all of that. But governance is not an issue. There we have women home-based workers, but it's more towards the technical staff, and the, you know, those key positions are held by men. And that's something which we're trying to dissuade, use capacity building, and push for women home-based workers to take those positions.
Yeah. So just to jump in here, I think that might be a unique situation of HomeNet South Asia, but our cooperative federation is a member of the National Cooperative Union of India. And on the board, there are no women. This time they are having elections next month, and they said that they would like to have 2 women on the board. And the National Cooperative Development Corporation, I'm the only woman on the board. And, you know, it's lonely up there. I'm used to being with lots of sisters, and just being the lone voice over there is not always fun. I mean, we do our best, but so just wanted to add that. And the other thing I wanted to quickly say is, because we are in the pandemic context, while women are nowhere in the decision-making and governance, or definitely don't have equal representation on boards and governance, what we do see when there's a crisis, they turn to us. So during the pandemic, you know, they came and said, you know, you go and give all these messages, you know, you do this, you know. Men were like sitting at home, holding their heads, having lost their jobs, which is terrible. But you know, when it came to taking risk, when it comes to doing the sort of hard work or the leg work, when it comes to doing things which are low cost, which are not very remunerated, that's when they remember us, and we do it well. And so, as Simel said, it would be good to have us in the long term, not just to be firefighters. And it's not, I'm not talking about SEVA, I'm talking about the, you know, about 3 million grassroots, even government functionaries who are running childcare centers, and ASHAs, we call them, the healthcare workers. So they're the ones who are on the front line, and nobody thought about, you know, insurance for them. Nobody thought about who's going to take care of their kids when they're running around helping others. So this is sort of a curious thing, that on one hand, we are not in the decision making, but we are very much there when it comes to the firefighting and crisis management, which we are quite good at. All right, other questions? So there's a question here. I would like to understand the future of work in connection to women-led SSEs, many of which are not yet high-tech. The future of work in connection to women-led SSEs. Anyone would like to take that on?
Saloni would probably be also in a good position to respond to this. But if we are talking about future work only as technology, I think ownership and control of these online applications by workers is an important issue. And I know SEVA is a co-op federation is doing some work around getting some of the sectors of co-ops and collectives of their members to transition to online applications. And this has also been done, for instance, with home care workers, domestic workers. Yes, you have these online apps, but they are often not owned by the workers and can be very exploitative. So if they are worker owned, and there is a movement around platform cooperativism on this, then they are the ones to be able to negotiate with the employers and the beneficiaries of their services in more direct and in better terms for themselves. And I think we shouldn't think of future work only as technology, but there is other
Yes.
changes, especially like climate change, the climate crisis, and then how do our institutions, SSE institutions, also help improve resilience for in these vulnerable communities for that. And demographic change, I mean, what we are seeing, both pushed by climate, but also pushed by conflicts around the world, the forced displacement of people. And once again, we see SSE institutions, co-ops, social co-ops, collectives, rotating saving groups, self-help groups coming together, either of the refugees and migrants themselves or from host communities. So I think this is another area where the future of work is also very closely related to forced displacement. The pandemic will be displacing more people as well. So how do we, in this context, adapt or develop or improve services for that? And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Simel. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I could
Janvi?
take that question. Is, we've had these conversations with our members also about what future of work is for home-based workers. And just to say, in our part of world, this entire thing talk about artificial intelligence and everything, we're really far away from that at the moment. And we don't see it the way, maybe the more developed countries are looking at it. Like Simel mentioned, there are a lot of other components of future of work which we are looking at. Specifically shorter supply chains and more sustainable supply chains, which have better climate, outcomes. Or think about, now a lot of this digital shift is happening. Now that's a reality for us. This digital partition that has happened, especially for women in rural areas, where they're not able to get onto it. What technology means, internet means, and how can they shift? A lot of organizations, Seva, we have Sabas, we have many other organizations are working very hard at it. Some of them are developing their own apps at the moment, trying to see how the members can get on board. The third thing which I want to talk about is also about different forms of organizing. How are we building these grassroots organizations? How are they coming together for global voice? Today a lot of people know about Zara has faced so many issues, and Zara's had, some bankruptcy, and these global brands. How many people know about cooperatives going under, producer companies going under because of the pandemic? Nobody knows about it. So just to say that, how do we create the visibility? How do we come together? Now, those are certain things that we really have to ponder over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Saloni, did you want to say? And then we'll take more
Thank
questions.
you. I wanted to actually, because it's the future of work, take us back to what Varsha Ben and Sangeeta Ben said. And they both talked about young girls and adolescent girls, and how do we bring that spirit of cooperativism, of collectivism within them, within these people, within this group. And the cooperative, as we see, is thinking about this. They are connecting with the next generation. There's a need to do it more, but it has started. They also talked about organic farming. So like Simel said, it's not just about technology. It's also about, making sure we have a next generation which has a sustainable means of livelihood. There's another cooperative, Abodana, which is talking about upcycling, recycling, making products out of recycled clothes. So things like that are being addressed by our cooperatives. They need a support, they need a platform in order to amplify this concern, this voice. That was one point. The other thing was on technology. We can't deny that there's the emergence of gig work, of platform work in a large way. And there are concerns. How do we extend social protection? How do we ensure labor protections through these platforms? These are questions we need to answer specifically from a gender lens. and especially for work sectors that have women predominantly, like care work, domestic work, or beauty services. And the gig economy is growing fast, so these are concerns that we need to start addressing fast. The third thing is on e-commerce. The government has platforms. In India, there's a GEM portal, a government e-marketplace. There's also private platforms like Amazon, which have sort of incentives for women to connect. There's Amazon Saheli, which means sister, where they showcase products made by women. But the processes involved in onboarding on these platforms is still not accessible to women. So simplifying those processes and also preferred procurement, not just a 3% quota, but a higher quota for women-made product and women's services on e-commerce platforms and other, procurement platforms is necessary. So those are the few points I did want to add.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak at this point? Care of planet Earth as well. So that's just a little point I wanted to add in. In India, we call it decentralized economy or local economy. The founder of SEWA calls it the 100-mile principle, which actually learned from Canadian farmers, where you buy as far as possible. So there you go. This is how we learn from each other. Where you buy local. So 6 basic things, roti, kapda, makan, how do you say that in English? Food, clothing, shelter, primary financial services, primary education, and primary health care. At least these should be provided within a 100-mile radius or less, and connects up with a lot of what you all have been saying about local marketing and local procurement and so on, and buy local, and seeing a whole rush of comments on this now. Anyone else would like to comment or say something? Otherwise, I will move us towards the way forward.
I think just one point, Miraiban, I think in what you just said, I think is very important. It's even more important in the context of COVID, where supply chains, longer supply chains have been severed. So how to ensure, I think in the preparedness, post-COVID preparedness, resilience building, sustaining these shorter supply also chains, fairer, making them fairer as well in the process, not just efficient, but fairer. And here the role of the people's organizations, solidarity organizations, becomes very important. And we have been talking, there's of course consumer supported agriculture, many different models. We've also been very much pushing for this cooperative to cooperative trade, where the producer organizations can be linked to the consumer cooperatives. And there are some examples of this which benefit both the producers through their co-ops and associations and the consumers as well. It's a form of solidarity there as well.
Thank you. And before I go into the last part, if there's no more questions, I would also like to add that I think several countries are realizing this. I mean, it remains to be seen how it's implemented, but in my own country, India, our Prime Minister has called for Atmanirbhar Bharat, which means self-reliant India. And of course, self-reliance and local is not a new thing for us. I mean, this was one of the key slogans of our freedom movement and part of our liberation struggle against colonialism. So in some ways, we have to reinvent ourselves and perhaps rediscover some of these ideas that are still fresh for us, although sometimes it seems like we forget them. So maybe I'll go on now to the end, and Simel and others have also asked me to share some things in, and Simel on the Cooperative Federation, and happily I had some thoughts and wove it in, and then all of you gave me so much food for thought. But the first point I have, which I learned from all of you and from my SEWA sisters, is organize. If we want a future of work, if we want a sustainable future on this planet, then we have to work harder and longer to organize local people, informal workers, women, those who are the most vulnerable, those who are normally excluded and forgotten. And we organize them into unions, cooperatives, federations, alliances we've heard of, all kinds of organizations that are creatively developed in all of your countries across the globe. And fortunately, we have a rich harvest of them. I think what I've learned in my 40 years at SEWA is that there's no shortcut to organizing. We have to organize, bring people together, particularly those who are typically excluded, like women, and then build their own organizations. They may be small, they may be village or neighborhood organizations, or they may be rather large federations, horizontal across regions or the country. I think the second related issue, which we just touched on, is this whole, I'm learning a new phrase, proximity economy, or what we call decentralized local economy. And we heard, whether it is Quebec or other countries, how this local, regional, decentralized approach, and especially if possible, led by women and local people, is the way. So I don't want to stress on that because it's preaching to the converted here. I think another theme that has come up is the building of local leadership, women, young people, indigenous people in our countries. Sangeeta Ben is from our indigenous community, Adivasi. It's not well known, but 8% of India's population is indigenous. And I know Canada also has large indigenous populations and other countries as well. So building local leadership, particularly of those who normally don't get a chance to be in the leadership. Third, what I'm hearing from my SEWA sisters and all of you is share our stories. We need to hear. We need to be encouraged and inspired by each other. We need to hear their voice right up to the ILO, and also in our own national governments, which sometimes or oftentimes don't hear the voices of those at the grassroots, particularly women, minorities, and others. I think what we've learned also in our country and from this webinar is that the response during COVID has ranged from poor to mixed. I didn't hear anyone in this session say that they were satisfied by the way their governments responded, whether local, regional, national. And I think perhaps one strategy would be is if we have more, as many of you have mentioned, voice and representation of women and others from solidarity groups in planning and in committees, so that we don't make these same mistakes in future pandemics or other disasters. The fourth, what I'm hearing from all of you, and certainly our own experience at SEWA Cooperative Federation, is the need for much more support. If we have to have thriving solidarity economies, local economies, proximity economies, then we need various types of support and all together. One that came out strongly through this session is finance, and how finance can, be a game changer. We know that. And how much finance is needed to working capital or loans or other forms of support so that people can again restart their solidarity groups and enterprises. We also heard about digitalization, both the power of it and also where the huge gaps are, particularly gender gaps and rural urban gaps in many of our countries. We also need more digital literacy, as well as the spread of digital equitable than currently. And we know that it's a powerful tool for organizing. We also need support from policymakers. All of you mentioned that, while on one hand, Simel rightly cautioned us that we must retain our autonomy at all costs and democratic functioning. On the other hand, we need to do much more to reach out to policymakers, perhaps share our experiences during the this pandemic and how, it was these solidarity groups and that decentralized support work that they provided that actually kept people afloat and helped so that they didn't go under. So that might be something we'd like to share. And in fact, just on this one, at the end of this month, our Cooperative Federation has organized a webinar with women-led cooperatives, women's cooperatives across India. And we will be having representatives of the Labor Ministry, the Medium, Small and Micro Enterprise Ministry, which is leading relief efforts, and the National Cooperative Union of India to listen to women, much as we've done today. What are the challenges? What are the creative and innovative ways that they manage to survive their tiny businesses and enterprises and solidarity groups, and what kind of support they need? Then we also, I find, need champions. Again, I'm sorry, I know my country best, India. We live in, as someone, I think you mentioned, Karen, that we live in such different worlds. You might as well be on another planet. So recently a champion, a friend of ours who's in the Confederation of Indian Industry, said she was in a state of shock because she heard all the business leaders and industrialists of India saying that, everything is back on track. And then she stood up because she had all the data and information from us and spoke about the informal economy and how nothing much is getting back on track. And they were shocked to know this. They just didn't have the information. Same country might as well be living on another planet. So those are the kinds of champions we need to find. Other support, a livelihood restoration fund. My sisters mentioned working capital, but beyond that also a livelihood restoration fund, which would do skilling, which would, focus on non-traditional skilling as well. So like, for example, now we are skilling our members to drive auto rickshaws, e-rickshaws as well. So those kinds of things, new ideas. It's a time of rebuilding, so let's think fresh. Many of you have mentioned and fully agree with you, social security, social protection. In my own country, hardly anyone had, and I was sorry to hear that in Canada also you felt that your government fell short on that. Well, we didn't have anything. So people were left to their own devices, trudging home, as you would have seen on your television screens. I think many of your ideas are most welcome, whether it's, a planned response with solidarity group representation so that we get appropriate policies and plans into action, whether it's voice on these committees, and of course, voice will only come with organizing, so you go back to organizing. The fifth point that I heard from all of you and strongly resonates with us is research and documentation. We need to bring out what works and what doesn't. We need to document such sessions and share widely. We need to talk to our policymakers with hard data as well, like 65% of our people lost income. They need to know that. They think everything's fine and dandy. Well, it's not. This is what happened. And then skilling in new sectors of the economy. And here I also like to mention the other organization where I serve, WeGo, which has been mentioned by Simel. We've also done a lot of research and documentation across the globe with solidarity groups, and that is being made available to different countries, a call to action. So that's one of many actions that WeGo is taking, and also, of course, encouraging solidarity groups, membership-based organizations to take these issues forward and to organize stronger, harder, and faster. I think I'll stop there. There's always more to say, but it has been an absolute pleasure to be with all of you who are our, what shall I say, kindred spirits, our sisters and brothers across the globe. It's important for us to feel, each of us, that we are not alone, that we have each other, and that we'll keep dreaming and building together for a world based on social and solidarity economy. So I thank each of our speakers most warmly. I thank our organizers from the bottom of our heart for bringing us together. Those who are to get up at 4 in the morning, those who it's dinner time for, and those of us who are somewhere in between. but that's the beauty of our planet. And we thank you all, and I thank you all very much.